Electric Friends, a Gary Numan podcast celebrating the tracks by a musical pioneer.
Firstly, Bill Sharpe, thanks so much for being a guest on Electric Friends.
That's a pleasure.
So we'll obviously speak about your time working with Gary Numan in a bit, but it'd be great to go back to the very start and just how you first found a love for music. So I think it's right that you had a classical background. Is that right?
Yeah, I started. I started learning the piano when I was 7. I had my first piano teacher was a lady called Doris Ragg, a very scary lady, and if you got a scale wrong, she used to whack you on the knuckles with a ruler sideways, so that wasn't a great thing for your hands, really. So that I got through all of that, and it's sort of learning all the early pieces, going through all the grades, and there's a point where you get to about grade 5 when you actually start enjoying playing, because you can actually play good stuff, and people say, "Oh, go and play us the piano." And so I started doing that, and then slowly sort of really got a little better at the piano, and then music. I mean, my family was they weren't professional musicians, but they all loved jazz and pop, all sorts of music, really. So I was always aware of what was going on, in my sort of early years, early 60s, mid 60s, a Beatles fan and Stones, all that kind of stuff. But then went down the classical route, went to school, and then went to university, studied music at Birmingham University. Always playing in bands. I kind of always wanted to be in a band, really. I went through the whole thing of like getting a music degree and all, which, it's all parents, like a lot of parents say, well, get a good background, get a good education, and then go and play in a band.
You're in quite a few bands, weren't you, at the beginning? Is that right? I think one of them was Tracks.
Yes. I mean, I played in lots of school bands, and then I left, and I got a job with the BBC for 5 or 6 years, a studio manager, or posh name for a sound engineer. And while I was doing that, I was still playing in bands. And then I got invited by our Shakatak drummer, Roger Odell. He started a band in Bishop Stortford, where I was born. And he said, "Do you want to come and join the band?" So we were playing sort of jazz rock stuff by Chick Corea, John McLaughlin, all kinds of Weatherby, all kinds of stuff like that. And I enjoyed. I sort of got into all that kind of music really in the mid 70s. Our bass player was a guy called Trevor Horn, who went on to become a pretty well-known producer. And that was kind of the start of the whole. Slightly, I mean, we weren't professional or anything like that, but it was the kind of start of the whole process, really, in the mid 70s, which led to, in 1980, the formation of Shakatack.
Well, yeah, so I was going to ask, like, how were Shakatack founded? Like, how did that band sort of come about, and what was like the big inspirations that you all took and decided this is the route we wanted to go down?
Well, the Roger, myself, and Keith Winter, who was our guitarist, the three of us were in Tracks. And so I started writing music for Tracks, sort of some pretty weird, crazy music. I think my most bizarre track was a song called Downwind from Cerberus, which was, we did a little reunion gig a year or so ago. We pulled out that song, and it's just, I can't remember what the hell I was thinking writing that, but it's kind of fun to do. So I started writing stuff, and then I had a few tunes that Roger was playing in a band with Trevor Horn. Actually, they played in the old days in the 70s. People of my age will remember Mecca clubs, places before kind of discos, where they'd have bands playing chart hits. So you wouldn't necessarily have a DJ, you'd have a live band, which was great. It was good fun in those days. Anyway, so Trevor and Roger were the rhythm section in that band, and the guy who ended up being Shakatak producer, Nigel, was the MD, keyboard player in the band. He'd heard some of my songs and said to Roger, "I've got this idea maybe to start a band kind of playing instrumental jazz funk stuff," because we all listened to the Crusaders and Stevie Wonder, all kinds of different kinds of music, particularly coming over from the States. So we met, and I had a couple of tunes, and he said, "Well, can you?" There was a song at the time by a guy called Rodney Franklin called "In the Groove," which is a piano-led instrumental. And he said, "Maybe write a couple of tunes in that sort of vein." So I wrote a couple of tunes, one which was called "Steppin'," which was the first Shakatak single. That's kind of how it all came about. We hadn't been touring or playing or anything like that, really. We sort of, there was a bunch of people who got together to make a few, maybe I say not demos, but recordings, and see what happened. And we got a little bit of interest. We did a few gigs, and we got signed to Polydor. So it was one of those fortunate things, different people coming to a gig, different times. The Brit Funk thing was all happening in the early 80s. So it was good timing.
Definitely. Well, I mean, Shakatak scored many massive hits, particularly, you know, Nightbirds and Down on the Street. And what was it about, like, your music, do you think, that resonated with so many people in that era? Because that era of music had so much stuff going on. So it was great to see Shakatak break through and around the world as well.
Yeah, I think the first few years we toured around from 1980 through to about end of 81. We played all over the country. I mean, the most bizarre venues. I mean, I remember one was the Star Bar in Huddersfield, which had mold, dripping water on the ceiling. You know, this sort of classic rock and roll story. You know, the places you played, probably none of them exist anymore.
Yeah.
But it was great fun. I mean, you know, when you start off, it's not necessarily easy. There's a lot of traveling. You're in the back of a transit van and whatever. So, but it was, you know, when you're that age. I mean, we were a little bit older, in our mid to late 20s, but it was still great fun. We had a real laugh. Not sure if anything was going to happen of it, but we built up like you do in those days, we built up a following. So people started coming to the gigs. We released another single, then another single. We didn't release an album until 1981. So it was just all singles, and the record company kind of stuck with us as they used to do. And so, so it was mainly instrumental music, which was surprising to see it get in the charts. And then in 81, middle of 80 to end of 81, we did this. I'd written this tune called "Easier Said Than Done," and we decided to use the girls on the chorus thing. So it's sort of piano and the chorus thing. And I think people, if you have, you know, like in pop music, you know, people like a hook, as you used to be called. And "Easier Said Than Done" had the vocal chorus. And I think the blend of the instrumental music with the vocal kind of worked in a sort of commercial level. And suddenly, you know, we were on Top of the Pops, and off we went. You know, in those days, Top of the Pops was, you know, 10, 15 million people used to watch it. So if you were on Top of the Pops, unless you were really bad, although there were some really bad people that picked Top of the Pops, but you know, you were off and running, really.
And I think, in particular in Japan and America as well, they really dug into it, didn't they? I think.
Yeah, Japan. I mean, Japan was 1983. We first went there. We still go to Japan every year, pretty much. We've been there a lot, and it broke into Europe. It kind of broke into all over the world, actually. And I mean, years ago we played in a lot in maybe early to mid 90s. We did a lot of countries in the former Soviet Union, Eastern Europe, and so we were amazed how many people were listening to our music in the Cold War, you know, because of the time when we used to go to West Berlin. You know, you'd have to go through the corridor to get to West Berlin. So it was a very different world then. And I had a mail recently from a lady promoter in Georgia, in Tbilisi, saying, "We'd love you to come back here," you know, like 20, 30 years later. The world's a very different place. So it's amazing how music travels. Certain countries, like we haven't really done a lot in France and other countries, but other countries we've done really well. So for different bands, certain territories, and it's hard to know why specifically, love your music. And so you suddenly arrive somewhere like South Africa. We've toured there quite a few times after apartheid finished. And they love our music out there. So we get to travel the world, different places. And it's lovely hearing people's stories, you know, about how they heard the music and how they are. And I always like to sort of talk to people after the show because it's great to hear people's stories. So I mean, it's been a fantastic 40 years, you know, plus.
Definitely. Well, at the height of Shakatack's success in 1985, you teamed up with Gary Numan to create the Sharpe and Numan duo. So on paper, you'd say that Shakatack's music was quite different to Gary's early synth pop stuff, but by the mid 80s, he had started experimenting with funk and pop as well. So but those who don't know, like, how did that collaboration first come about, and were you already like a fan of his work?
Well, obviously, I was very aware of Gary because he had massive hits. I mean, Cars and Our Friends Electric and other songs, were huge. So it's hard not to know who he was. But it was just pure coincidence because I was asked to do a solo album in 1984, and we had a little downtime, Shakatak, and I thought I had some songs that I'd written, and I fancied trying a sort of mix of styles, really, and just because I would kind of always listen to all different kinds of music, and so I went into the studio called Rock City in the Shepperton Film Studios, which Gary owned, and so there's a chap called Nick Smith who worked on a few of Gary's albums. His dad was guy called Norman Smith, who was very famous, having worked on some of the early Beatles records. So that sort of sound engineering came through the family. So Nick, having worked with Shakatak, I said, "Would you want to work on this album?" He said, "Great." And so it was just really the two of us, and we went into the studio and discussed about what we were going to do. And I played all these songs. I had a few kind of slightly sort of electro-ish songs. I had a song I'd written called New Thing from London Town, and Change Your Mind. I kind of I had an idea for it, so we went in and started working on that song, and as we worked on it, we kind of created this introduction, which we thought, well, that sounds pretty good. That was just really sort of weird thing. Nick was messing around with the sound desk, and we just had time just to sort of muck around really with sounds. And originally, I was planning to sing the song myself because I wanted to have a go at singing. But I'm not a great singer, and so we kind of virtually finished the track and thought, well, this is really good. So I started singing it, and he just pressed the button. He went, "Not really," and we both knew that it wasn't right. And so we thought, what are we going to do? We got this great track, we got the tune, and he said, "Well, why don't we send the cassette of the backing track and the melody?" So I was going la 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 on it. Send it to Gary and see if he would fancy singing it. So Nick sent the tape to Gary's dad, Tony, and he got it to Gary. Gary heard it and came back and said, "Yeah, he'd love to do it." So then, of course, he, knowing the studio, came in and we listened through to it, and he went and started singing it. And as he used to say to Nick, because Nick had worked on his vocals, because obviously he knew the exact sound, the effects to put on his voice. And we started singing it. We looked at each other and we thought, my God, this is amazing. It just worked. I mean, it was pure chance. I mean, it might have been completely wrong. But as soon as he started singing it, we were like, this is really cool. So, and he did it probably in 2 or 3 takes. I mean, there was no messing around. He obviously sat and listened to it, had a few ideas of how he was going to sing it. So he did that. And then a couple of girls we were working with on the album came in and also sang the chorus with Gary. And we sat and listened to the record. We actually sent it up to Polydor, and they came down the next day and said, "This is a hit record."
Oh, great. Yeah.
From doing an album that really I got, all sorts of mixture of stuff. It was just kind of a nice thing to do. And suddenly it looked like we might have a hit record on our hands here. Totally random, but that's how it came about.
Yeah, was a really underrated, I think, 80s, pop gem. And it's great to hear Gary, do something a little bit different. And I suppose it was an interesting experience for him to kind of come in, not having done the writing of it, and just so it must have been a different kind of experience for him as well.
Yeah, no, I mean, it was very different for him because it was literally done. I mean, it was great, obviously, that he'd worked with Nick. So, because I didn't know him, we hadn't met. So it was nice to have that connection, so he felt comfortable. And then as soon as we started working on it, we were having a laugh and messing around, and he absolutely nailed it. And then we all Gary was sort of quietish in those days, and he sort of made a few comments, but I think deep down he realised it was not his typical style. And then what we also did, which really made a difference as well, because we created the song, but then the record company said we need to get a remix of it. So there's an American guy called Wally Brill who was who he worked with lots of different artists, and he took the track into another studio and remixed it and kind of just added stuff to it. He kind of tightened up the sound. I think our version was good, but Wally actually kind of turned it into a hit record by changing the drum sounds and tightening the track up, putting these bass drum fills just before the chorus. So he definitely added something to it. And then when he'd finished with it, that was we thought, this is great. And then off we went. So Polydor got right behind the track, and we got on top of the pops, I think they felt it could be a top 10 record because it was, I have to say, when I listen back to it sometimes, I think it still sounds like a really good production. There's lots of interesting ideas on it because we were just having a lot of fun doing it. So I think it maybe would have been nice if it had done better, but even so, it still did well, and it traveled around the world, and I still get really nice comments from people. If I do listen back to it, I hear it on the radio occasionally, and I think, well, it still sounds good. It's a good kind of dance record in a way.
And what I found interesting was that Gary was still using his berserker style image as well, with the white and blue makeup. So what did you think of that at the time? Was it just like, I'll just let him do what he'd like to do? And
when we do Top of the Pops and other video, when we did the video for Change Your Mind, actually, Gary would just travel with his mum, Beryl, because Beryl used to do his makeup, and it was kind of a good, because the little sort of strap line was a lot of the papers were saying, the odd couple. Obviously, I was like, in those days, I think, we all were into sort of, in the odd sunbed and stuff like that. So I was sort of slightly have a little bit of a suntanny kind of thing, the old hair, not quite a mullet. And Gary was like this blue and white in makeup, so we looked so different. But maybe in a way, that kind of worked. It was a good promotional little thing to do. So I thought it was great. And I remember doing the video, it was such a simple idea, but it worked really well. So I think we ended up with a great track, and also I really liked the way the video was done, very simple, and the way he was sort of circling around this circle of lights, and I was sort of sitting playing, doing the computer and doing, which looks really dated these days because it was an old Mac computer, but it was cutting edge technology at the time, and so it worked really well, sort of contrasting the two of us, I was really pleased the way it all finished up.
Right. Well, and was it thought of as going to be a one-off, or because it obviously led to a new thing from London Town doing that version of that song with him as well? So was it a case of, that was really good, let's do some more?
Well, I thought it was a one-off for the album. And then his a guy that ran, he had a record company called Numan Record, and I got a phone call and they said, would you fancy doing another record? Because Polydor, I think at the time, they weren't so keen to do another single, which I thought was really odd because they just had a top 20 record. So I think it was maybe because the Famous People was the album it was on. It did okay, but it didn't set the world alight. So perhaps that's why they didn't think about doing another song, because we hadn't planned to do any more. So I went in the studio with Gary. We did a new thing from London Town again, which was, we kind of did, I had the thoughts in my head of how it would sound. So Gary kind of walked in. The whole process was really that Nick and I would do the backing track, and I had the tune and the lyrics. It was all done really. So he kind of came in and sang it. It was a bit harder and a bit sort of less dancey, say, than Change Your Mind. And so we did a little video for that as well. And that, because it was on Numan Records, I guess they didn't have the budget to push it. So I can't remember how it did in the charts, but it kind of started the process of, let's maybe do a few other tracks together. And I think maybe by doing that led to when I talked to Polydor again and we discussed it, and they eventually said, well, maybe it might be a nice idea to do an album.
Mm.
So then we had, in the late 80s, we had the opportunity to do the album together, which was great. So I sat in the studio where I lived at the time for a week or two, locked myself away. I kind of came up with all these tunes, backing tracks. And up till then, the first 2 or 3 tracks, Gary hadn't written any lyrics. So we decided on the rest of the album that he'd do all the lyrics for the album. So I would send him my ideas for the songs and me la-la-la-ing, and then he would just write the lyrics. So it worked quite well. So we didn't actually write together at all. It was done independently. And when we did the album, we recorded all the backing tracks, and Gary came in for a few days and sang the vocal over the backing tracks. So I know looking back on it, he'll think, well, I wasn't really involved in the album so much because Nick and I were just doing all the recording. But I guess, that was the process that worked for us, and he seemed cool with it at the time. So yeah, and that was the sort of process of putting that whole thing together.
And reading his autobiography, he was very complimentary of working with you, but also the album as a whole. But he was very disappointed with maybe the record label's lack of promotion for it. I just wondered if was that a feeling you shared as well?
Yeah, I thought that they really pushed the boat out on Change Your Mind, and the result was the way it was. When it came to pushing the album, we'd released a song called I'm on Automatic, which it did okay, but it didn't sort of chart as well as Polydor had hoped. I think when it didn't chart as well as they hoped, then they stopped pushing the album. It was a shame, really, because the album, they spent a lot of money on doing the cover. I mean, the cover, we went into an old, can't remember, it was like an old, not warehouse, it's the wrong word, like almost like Aliens, those sort of big sort of places where you expect to see sort of loads of aliens in, sort of like, not coffins, but you know what I mean. It's an old sort of water tower kind of thing to do the photo session. So it was a really, really imaginative cover. They spent a lot of money putting that all together. And then when it didn't sort of the single didn't do as well as they'd hoped, then they just didn't really get behind the album. That's when I think we were both really disappointed. I remember chatting to him about it, saying we were actually really pissed off, to be honest, because we put a lot of time and effort into promoting it, pushing it, and then it was like, oh, well, there you go. So obviously the album came out, but it didn't do as well as we hoped, because, I mean, it had 4 top 40 songs on it. So you think, well, that's enough to really push the album. So, we were both disappointed, for sure.
And was it true that you had thought about potentially doing a second album at one stage, but then for whatever reason that fell through?
Yeah, we did a couple more songs together. I had a few ideas, and that's when actually we, weirdly enough, after the album came and went, I had 2 or 3 ideas, and he came over to my house. We didn't live too far from each other in those days, and we actually kind of started writing together. Which was quite nice, really. So I'd have an idea, and he'd say, "We'll try this and try that." And then I think I was away touring a fair bit, and then he was busy doing stuff, and so we did, I think, maybe 2 or 3 songs, and then it just seemed to peter out a bit, really, because we had other commitments, and then we never got the momentum again to sort of get back to doing it. And I think, probably he thought, well, that's that, I've done that. And I know that Gary's fans, they have very, divided opinions about people he works with, because obviously he's collaborated with a few different people. So I know that sort of for a lot of people, the Sharpe and Numan thing they probably didn't like it, which is perfectly fair. But I've also had some really nice comments from people saying that they really enjoyed it as well. So it's and I think for the Sharpe and Numan thing, for maybe his real fans, is probably a bit Marmite. It's a bit you love it or you hate it kind of thing. But that's what music's about, really. But generally, I've had no one come up to me and say, "Why, like punch me? How dare you work with Gary?" and all that sort of stuff. No. But most people have been really kind, which is nice.
So you have a couple of songs there that could that could still exist in some capacity.
There are 2 or 3 songs that exist.
Yeah.
I mean, he's singing on a few demo-y things but they'll probably never see the light of day because, I mean, now he's obviously he's in a great place touring, and his whole show is is very, very different from the kind of stuff that we might ever do together again. So I can't. I mean, we stay in touch a little bit because obviously he's living in America now. But I can't see us ever working together again because he's in a very different place, and and doing really well. Maybe if he wasn't doing so well, he might self-help actually doing the track.
Yeah.
But I'm really pleased that he's doing great touring, and obviously from all the fans and people. I know some people contact me and they say they went to see the show, and it looks like he's putting on a really good show. Band sounds great, and his profile is really great. So yeah, I can't see us doing anything again together, but I'm really pleased what we did together. And when I listen back to some of the stuff, I think, well, it was a lovely thing to do. We got some great memories from that time, and it's a part of my history, part of his history. And particularly the Change Your Mind, I think, is the one song I do feel I think still stands the test of time. I think it sounds like when I hear it on the radio, I think that's a nice production.
Definitely. Well, you've been very prolific during your career. Obviously, lots of solo albums. You work with Gary and lots of other collaborations, and obviously everything with Shakatak. So, is it fair to say that you essentially just love the process of making and performing music, and that's never gone away?
Yeah. Oh, yeah. I mean, the Shakatack thing is, we're like a family, and that's our number one priority. Or even when I was working with Gary, I think the band thought, oh my God, he's going to leave and go off, and they're going to be like the Eurythmics or something like that. But that was never the plan. Gary obviously had his thing. I had the Shakatack thing. So it was never in my brain to do that. Shakatack's always been the main thing. But when we have a bit of downtime, and I just enjoy the process, you say, and I've always liked all different styles of music. I mean, before Shakatack, I was playing guitar in like rock bands, so like all styles of different music. And so when I've quite often I meet people at various things, and so I met Fast Eddie Clarke. He was in Motorhead, and we just sat together and we got on really well. And he said, "You fancy doing an album?" So I said, "Yeah, great, let's do that." So it comes about. I worked with Jarl Wobble, the bass player. Hill, and we met, we played a bit together, so fancy making an album. So I kind of thought when it's different people and different styles, I really enjoyed that process. And working with those guys was completely different to Shakatack. I mean, Eddie was a lovely guy, could be a bit up and down. Took a long time to finish that album, but I'm so pleased that particular album, we did that as a blues album because he loved playing blues, because it's the last thing he ever did, sadly, before he passed away. And Jarl Wobble. And then, of course, I do more jazz stuff with an American guy called Don Bruce, and we've made a few albums together. So I'm always up, if I was out, at a party, or quite often, you meet people, and somebody said, "Oh, Bill, you fancy making an album?" I'd probably go, "Yeah, let's do an album." So I'm always up for trying different things, but whereas the Shakatack thing it's still the number one thing. And same for all of us. I mean, we're all go off and do solo projects, and I think that's really healthy.
Absolutely. Well, I've thought of a couple of questions from listeners as well. I'll just put past you. So just from Ariel Melton, she just asked, I love Shakatack as well as Sharpe and Numan. My burning question is, will Shakatack tour the US soonish? Would love to see them live.
Well, yeah, we would love to tour America, actually. It's a weird thing. We've never actually played in America. We nearly have a few times. Back in the 90s, we had a couple of albums that did well in the contemporary jazz charts. We were going to go out and play in the States, but for some reason it didn't work out, whether it's to do with visas or the financial side of things. I mean, I've recorded in the States. I've done albums there. I've played with different musicians out there. And so I performed in the States, but never as Shakatack. So we'd love to go out and play. I mean, I think it becomes more difficult. I know that touring and traveling in the States can be quite expensive.
Mm.
But I've always liked the idea of maybe like a one-off show, maybe in LA or New York, something like that. Always sounds pretty cool saying, yeah, we're just going to play in LA. So yeah, hopefully I would say we will. It's one of our ambitions is to get out and play in America. So hopefully we will sometime.
Awesome, fingers crossed. And Richard Verico asked, did he ever fancy a Sharpe and Numan tour? Was that ever even on the cards potentially at the time?
No, we never talked about a tour. I went to see Gary when he played at Hammersmith, actually, when the single was doing quite well. And I thought, well, would we perform that track together? And then I think we both sort of, it's kind of a difficult track. There's so much stuff on the track. I mean, of course, now it wouldn't be difficult to put it all together. But then, the introduction itself, I guess we could have copied it onto tape. But to put the song together would have been challenging. But we never, I doubt we'll ever play together live. Never say never. You never know.
Let's get it started now.
But I don't think it would probably fit into his show. Listening to the sort of stuff he's doing these days, I can't see him turning around suddenly saying, and now change your mind. I don't think
I'd love a dark reworking of it. That'd be brilliant. Yeah.
Maybe.
Yeah. And Richard James asked, what synths were used on Change Your Mind? Any details of the production process? For example, was the Fairlight CMI used for this one?
No, it was very simple actually. The only keyboards I used on it were let me think. It was a Prophet 5, which I used to do the bass synth. Because it was all played. I mean, there was no sequencing at all. It was all played live by hand. So I had to spend hours, obviously, getting the timing right. There was a drum machine. I can't remember. I don't know what drum machine we used, actually. Some kind of Simmons, I think, and a DX7. Or the introduction, that's all DX7. And a real piano on the chorus, that Change Your Mind. There's a piano thing, so that was real piano. So it's just it's just DX7, Prophet, and an old Bosendorfer piano and a drum machine.
Great. And just finally, Simon asks, I know that Bill worked with John Peel at the BBC in the early 80s. Does he have any interesting Peel anecdotes he'd be able to share?
The thing with all these, there's always so many stories you can't tell.
Yeah.
But the Peel, I guess one of the nice things about Peel and working with him was that I was still working at the BBC when I think maybe one of the first appearances we did on Top of the Pops. I still had a day job. It was a strange thing, but that's the way it was at the time. So I was doing a show. They used to pre-record Top of the Pops on a Wednesday, show on a Thursday. And John liked to pre-record his Thursday show on a Wednesday morning so he could go home and have a long weekend. So we recorded this show in the morning, and it so happened that he'd been invited back. It was the first time that he'd been asked to go back and compare Top of the Pops. Since I think he did it in the 60s, I think. And it's coincided that we were on it as well. So we finished recording his show at Broadcasting House and then we went down to Television Centre to do Top of the Pops, which was kind of fun. And then he decided, for some reason, when we recorded it, he started this little catchphrase thing, and he said, "Here's my mate Bill Sharpe, yet another awful shirt." And they were great shirts, but I thought it was really nice. So every time we were on Top of the Pops together, he always used to say, "My mate Bill Sharpe," and so it was kind of it was a nice thing for him to do because, to be honest, I mean, Shakatak was not his kind of music. And he did once play, easier said than done, he played it on his show because it was my birthday at the end of the show. But, normally it would not be his sort of music because he'd be playing, the undertones and all kinds of sort of like indie punk pop, pop. So we developed a friendship in spite of the fact probably he didn't really like the music. But you know what? we worked together, and that was fun, really. So he's a great guy, and he went way too young, actually.
Yeah.
He was 65. So, but we had some good times together too.
Still at number one, that's the Goombay Dance Band. Next week's Top of the Pops will be introduced by Simon Bates. We're going to play you out tonight with Shakatak. The fella in the dreadful shirt is my mate Bill Sharpe. Good night.
Awesome. Well, thanks so much for that, Bill. So finally, what's coming up next? When can fans potentially see or hear from you next in the work?
Well, yeah, with Shakatak, we kind of never stop touring. We do, like, we had a big European tour, 3 or 4 weeks in the spring, so that's like a proper tour, and we'll be doing that probably next autumn. But around the UK, we just have regular gigs that we do, and so in the beginning of August, we do every year we do 6 nights at the Pizza Express in Soho, which is a smallish 120-seat venue, but it's great because we just do like a residency there. And so we tend to do 9 or 10 nights, and then we do some more in the winter. So that's kind of a nice thing to do. And then if people want to check on www.shakatack.com, you can see where we're playing. And we had a new album that came out last year, but we've just signed a deal with a record company in Japan to do another 3 albums. So,
great.
So which is great, because we still actually do make, like Gary's still recording new music. We still make new music because we like to go out. People want to hear all the old hits, but it's also nice to throw in a few new tunes as well. So yeah, and it's still the original lineup, which is amazing. I mean, I jokingly say at gigs now, it's amazing because we're all still alive. We're a little bit older now, but yeah. So there aren't many bands from that era that still have the original lineup.
Yeah.
I can think of U2. There probably are loads of other bands I can't think of, but it's nice that the Shakatack family is still together, recording and touring. So if you come see us, come and say hi. We don't do meet and greet. We don't charge the people to come and see us, say hello, which I know is a very popular thing these days. So and we're very lucky. We're all a little bit older, and I'm sure Gary would say the same thing. We're all very grateful that people still come and see us, because live music has become so much more important now, because in terms of recording music, unless you're Taylor Swift or Ed Sheeran, you don't make nearly the same sort of money you used to be able to make back when we were having hit records. So the live music has become a much more important part for any young band or any band's source of income, because it's really hard to make money from recording these days.
Absolutely. Well, that all sounds really exciting. So thanks so much for your time today, Bill. It's been awesome having you on Electric Friends. Thank you.
Pleasure.
Electric Friends, a Gary Numan podcast celebrating the tracks by a musical pioneer.